Okay, well, we have our good friend John Lash here in the studio tonight to speak with us about the current events going on and give some of his insight into things. And we'll continue our ongoing dialogue about all things related to Gaia and all things related to planetary tantra and social change in general. So without any more delay, welcome, John.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Oh, it's great to have you, as usual. How are things in your neck of the woods?
Well, it's kind of like the calm before the storm, but I think it's that way pretty much in a lot of places around the world right now.
Yes, it is. Definitely.
Yeah.
So, well, you know, I thought maybe, considering the fact that I know you to be somewhat of an expert at astronomy, a naked eye astronomer, and someone who has been watching very closely what's happening in our cosmic realm, the you know, the energy fields that surround us. I thought maybe you might be able to, you know, chime in on whether you thought there could be possibly anything going on to kind of connect with what we're seeing in the social movements that are happening, like this occupation movement across America, and then the other various movements.
Well, sure. I'd be happy to contribute what I can in that respect. It is true that I'm a sort of cosmologist, of course. I study cosmology from the point of view of myth. I don't consider a myth to be a lie or a fabrication or a stupid invention of primitive people. I look at myth very carefully to see in what respects it may be a true element, a true reflection and description of processes in the universe which have been understood deeply by human beings before us, and we need to decode the myth to extract that knowledge. So I don't consider myth to be something that is completely, dismissed as a fiction. And I think the best way I could respond to your question, Fredericks, is to say that right now I'm involved with a group of people in an experiment to determine if there is a fantastic mythological event happening on the planet here. And that concerns something that is happening to the Earth itself. You know, I did practice astrology for many years. You probably know that.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't do that anymore, but it was a great learning experience for me in many respects. I was not a conventional astrologer, and in any way, shape, or form. And what I ought to say now, perhaps to put things clearly into people's minds, is that when I practiced astrology back in those days, I did it primarily as a psychological profiling tool. And I never predicted, and I also made a big point of telling my clients and my students that I did not believe in any theory of planetary influence on us, except the influence of the Earth itself. Okay?
Okay.
But the odd thing there is that if you look at any astrological systems that have been in practice for the recent, in current times, or even going back in the history of astrology, they all exclude the Earth.
Is that true of the Babylonians as well?
Yes, it is indeed. It's true of all astrology, and especially of modern astrology. You can go to the best astrologers in the world today. You can go to people like Liz Green, highly respected Jungian psychologist who uses astrology. Go to the ones who write the tabloid columns, and go to the real experts. And none of them will say anything about the Earth. So astrology is a system, paradoxically, which has left the Earth out of the interpretations of meaning. Of course, the Earth is included in astrology in an abstract sense because astrology uses a geocentric framework. So the Earth is obviously at the center of that framework. The Earth is at the center of your horoscope, as it were. But astrologers don't talk about what's happening, what's the influence of the Earth in your life? What does that placement of the Earth signify? They don't even know what the placement of the Earth means. So what we're looking at today, one of the things I did is that I introduced actually the Earth into the system of astrology. And as far as I know, I'm the only astrologer who's known to have done that. So, to cut to the chase, why is that important today? Well, I'm involved with this experiment now, which I started in March, called the Gaian Navigation Experiment. And it's essentially an attempt for me to apply my understanding of Gnosticism and astronomy and mythology, to merge them all together into the framework of an experiment in which we can follow what the Earth itself is doing at this time, at this moment in its evolution, in its journey through the universe. And if my interpretations are correct, and they are founded on the Gnostic writings of the Nag Hammadi library and so forth, we would be living now in a most extraordinary moment for the evolution of our entire species. The Gnostics did not predict anything in their books. The Gnostic writings of Nag Hammadi do not contain prophetic or apocalyptic material except for some very slight passages. But the Gnostics did leave us with one fantastic clue that comes out of their vision of the divine Sophia, comes out of their cosmology, out of their myth of the creation of the Earth itself and of the origin of the human species. As you know, and as some of your listeners know who are familiar with my book, I recount the Gnostic creation myth, as it were. And the central figure of this myth is a goddess figure from the galactic center called Sophia. And she is, in turn, what we today call Gaia, because that goddess force from the center of our galaxy morphed itself into the planet Earth. So I use the hyphenated term here, Gaia, Sophia. And this Gaia Sophia is the living presence of the Earth. And what the Gnostics predicted, in a sense, or what they left us as a tantalizing clue, was this concept of Sophia's correction. And this is really a fantastic concept, not only in the mystical cosmology of Gnosticism, but also possibly it could be translated into the language of social and sociological change, and could, in some respects, possibly form a framework for the current global civic uprising that we see. It could be a factor. It could provide a kind of certain kinds of guidelines for this global civic revolution that we're seeing. So there is a connection between the myth of the divine Sophia in Gnosticism and the current events that are happening here and there around the world. There is a connection that could be forming between those two elements. And I'm looking at that very closely.
Okay. And, I mean, it seems to me that, touching on a little bit of what we've discussed in the last show that you were on, when we were talking about the Gnostic roots of the Russian Revolution,
right.
It seems to me that one of the principles in Gnosticism that I think found a home, and the Russian people were able to take it on board because of the concept of freedom and liberty of the individual. Isn't that right? Well, yes. There are two... we haven't really talked about the specifics of the Russian Revolution yet. There are two things that I would advise we look at, that I would enjoy very much looking at with you in the course of these discussions. Two particular elements of the Russian Revolution that could serve as a tremendous mirror for us today. One of them is, who was understood to be the enemy in the Russian Revolution? And the second one is, who was providing the ideology, or if you will, the spiritual inspiration for the revolution. And if we can go back and look at how that played in the Russian Revolution, I think it would be extremely instructive to see how it's going to play out today. So getting back to your point just made,
Freedom, yeah, but freedom from what? One of the interesting things about the Russian Revolution that has been considered to reflect possible Gnostic influences behind it is that the loose ideology of the Russian Revolution involved breaking out of a system, and that system was the Tsarist tyranny of Russia in that time. Of course, if we want to look at it in sociological terms, there were several stages of the Russian Revolution, and the first stage was in 1905, which began with general strikes and the general people's revolt against the tyranny and brutality of the Tsarist regime. And we're sort of in that stage now in America and globally. There's sort of the beginning of strikes, the beginning of social rumblings, social protest, and revolt against the tyranny of what? See, we have to define the enemy. So the way they defined the enemy in the Russian Revolution at the first stage, the People's Uprising, which was about 12 years, from 1905 to 1917, was to say, we have to throw off this absolutely imbalanced situation, which is very similar to what we're seeing today. What is the meme going around now, the 1% and the 99%?
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, isn't it just like the same interests of international banking concerns that were, directly involved in all the system in Tsarist Russia at the same time?
That's right. That's right. There was a 1% then, there's a 1% now. And there was a perception at that time, more than 100 years ago, among the Russian people, due to the imbalance of the power structure and the imbalance of the distribution of finances, just like today, and due to the manipulation of the people in the banking system, in collusion with the government, which was a fascist government. The Tsarist Russia was the KGB and the later world famous units of surveillance in Stalinist Russia, and later were born in the Tsarist regime. They were born in pre-revolutionary Russia. So you had, if you go back and you look at the Tsarist regime before 1917, when it was overthrown, they had already formed under the Tsar's military network of policing the people. They already had an extensive surveillance group, an extensive surveillance system, which I think was called the Okhrana. And look at what we have today. But what happened in the Russian Revolution on that local scale, of course it was massive because Russia was huge, is now happening on the planetary scale. All the same elements are present. The control by the 1% of bankers and corporate magnates, the control of the media, the control of 99% of the people by a very small percent. That's already happening. And the surveillance, of course, is to the power of 10, greater than it was at that time. But these were the same factors. So there's a very clear mirror when we look back at the Russian Revolution. Many, many aspects.
Okay, John, we're coming up on our break here, so if everyone will stay tuned to Radio Free Humanity here on American Freedom Radio. We're talking to John Lash. The phone lines are open, 402-237-2525, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Radio Free Humanity. I'm Raider X here on American Freedom Radio, Voice of the Revolution. We are talking with John Lamb Lash. The phone lines are open, so please call in to 402-237-2525. That's 402-AFR-2525 to talk with John Lash about anything we've already covered before or tonight or anything that's going on right now.